Okay, people, go ahead and get out the PowerPoint over evidence for evolution. We're going to finish that up. We only have about 8 slides left, and then we'll start on a new one. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to get that out, get something to write with. Let's go. Okay, I know we've already done analogous structures, but just to recap, an analogous structure is what happens when 2, 3, 4, 12, however many different organisms are trying to solve the same problem. So in the situation on this side, we're talking about the issue of locomotion, of mobility. So our bat has wings, our bird has wings, and this dragonfly has wings. The issue they're trying to solve is how do I get from place to place? They all chose to do it with wings, but these animals aren't necessarily related to each other. So they have the same feature, it's used for the same process, but it's on individual species that are not and never will be related to each other. Same thing here with our fish and our dolphin. They both live in the ocean. It makes sense that they would want to be hydrodynamic. So they have those nice sleek bodies that kind of just part water above and underneath them. They have well-developed fins that allow them to cut through water and make them really, really agile. But fish and dolphins aren't related. Dolphins aren't fish, fish aren't dolphins. One's a mammal, one's a fish. So the term we use to describe this is called convergent evolution. And it's where two species pretty much evolve side by side because they exist in a similar environment. So let's move on. Okay, so again, convergent evolution is the independent evolution of similar features, not creatures, that should be an F. Right here, features. So the independent evolution of similar features in non-related species. And here's an example of convergent evolution. We have a flying squirrel, which is found in North America, and we have a sugar glider, which is found in Australia. The two are not related. Well, you might think to yourself, okay, they're both mammals, so they're kind of related, but they're very distantly related. Marsupials are very, very primitive. In a way, you could think of them as ancestral. Whereas placental mammals are more derived. So you can think of them as descendant. Sorry, I don't write well on this. And I kind of ran out on the corner right there. Oh well. So marsupials are so called because while they do give birth to live young, their babies finish their development inside of their mother's pouch. They have a pouch on the outside of their bodies. So about 3 to 4 months before the baby is full term, it will literally crawl out of her uterus, kind of gross, and into her pouch and do the rest of its developing at that location. Whereas with placental mammals, the newborn is, or not the newborn, but the fetus in this case is completely surrounded by the placenta. It's getting everything from mom, all of its nutrients, all of its oxygen. Waste is being removed directly from mom through that umbilical cord. And the baby will stay there until it's fully developed and ready to be born. So that's a huge difference between the two. One of the reasons why these guys are considered primitive, whereas these guys are more derived. Now, North America and Australia, not necessarily close to each other, so the chances of a sugar glider meeting a flying squirrel are slim to none. But let's compare their features. So they both have these nice, plumy, thick tails, kind of flat on the top, allows them to catch air, good air resistance there. And they're about the same size. And they also have this fold or flap of skin that runs from their forelimb to their hind limb. Now how these guys move around, they don't actually fly, but instead what they really do is glide. So they'll climb to the top of the tree and get a good area that they can jump off of, and they'll launch themselves into the air. When they do that, they'll snap out their arms and legs, stretching that skin nice and taut, just like how this picture shows you here. And that skin is going to catch the breeze. It's pretty much working on air resistance. And then they just kind of float and guide themselves down to the next tree they want to go to, or to the ground, or wherever it is they're going. But the reasons they look so similar to each other is because of where they're found. Very similar environments. They're both trying to solve the same problem, so they have evolved or developed the same features. Alright, on the video, this slide is going to be messed up. Pretty much it's just another example or series of examples of convergent evolution, and they're just using different kinds of animals, showing you how the two of them evolved side by side and, with the same features. Another name for convergent evolution is parallel evolution. And if you think about it, they both evolve at the same rate, but they never actually meet. So if you're hearing weird noises in the background, my husband's like packing stuff downstairs, so yeah, that might echo. Sorry. Okay, another example or another bit of evidence for supporting evolution is something called vestigial organs. So vestigial just means small or reduced. And pretty much what a vestigial organ is, it's a remnant. And it's a remnant of a structure that was once fully functioning in an ancestral species. So over here we have our friend Basilosaurus, which is, like I told you before, a primitive kind of whale. And if you look at his hind region, you will see what looks like little tiny legs. And it's because they are little tiny legs. So this kind of links the whole sea mammal to land mammal thing. Why would he have hind legs if at some point he or his ancestors didn't use hind legs? So this would be a vestigial organ. It's not used, it's not functional at all, but it's retained. In this picture down at the bottom, we're looking at blind cave fish. So picture A shows you what the ancestral species of cave fish looked like, and picture B shows you what modern day cave fish look like. So in our first picture, we have a very obvious eye. Obviously, this fish can see it has an eye. In picture B, we don't. And it might be hard to see on the video, but what is left is a very small depression and then a little tiny structure that at one point used to be an eye. Now, this eye doesn't function. And if you think about it, they're called blind cave fish for a reason. Caves don't have light, so even if they had a functioning eye, they still wouldn't be able to see. So it's a situation of, I don't need it, why keep it around? I'm going to get rid of it. But they retain a little bit of the feature. It's just not functional. So, vestigial organs. Okay, again, this is a pretty bad slide on the video end. Hopefully it looks a lot better on your PowerPoint. But this one goes over what we call comparative DNA or comparative molecular structures. So we're looking at actual like DNA and amino acid and protein sequences here. In this example, we are looking at hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is found in red blood cells, as hopefully you remembered. It binds to oxygen and allows your blood to take the oxygen to different parts of your body. And comparative suggests that we're comparing it to different things. So in this particular example, we are comparing human hemoglobin structure to these other types of animals. A macaque is a monkey. No need to make a joke here, Hakeem. A dog, a bird, a frog, and a lamprey. And I'll tell you what a lamprey is when we get down there. So we're comparing human structures of hemoglobin to the hemoglobin in these other organisms. And the thing with molecular comparison is you can't do it for every single thing. You're going to have to find a structure that is kind of universal. So anything that has blood is going to have some form of hemoglobin, so that makes it a universal structure. Alright, so when you compare the macaque to the human, there are only 8 amino acid differences between our DNA for hemoglobin, or our DNA that gives rise to hemoglobin, and the macaque's DNA that gives rise to hemoglobin. If you think about it, it makes sense. A macaque is a monkey, which makes it a primate, which puts it in the same family as humans. Now let's go down here to the other end where we have lampreys. Lampreys are very primitive. They're kind of like big leeches, for lack of a better term. They exist mostly as parasites. So what they are, they're very eel-like looking, but they really are fish. And they have lots of sharp teeth at their front end and then an anus at their back end. There's not a whole lot in between. And they will latch themselves onto fish normally, but pretty much anything in the water that will sustain it. And they'll just suck their blood. So they're parasites. But they're very, very primitive. They actually evolved way before, like, modern-day fish. So when you compare a lamprey's hemoglobin amino acid structure to that of a human, there are 125 differences. Again, it makes sense. We are so far away from each other evolutionarily that there's no reason that we should have similar structures. Okay, so what we tend to use the information that we get from these molecular comparisons for is to build a family tree. And I use the word family loosely because it doesn't necessarily mean that these organisms are always going to be related. The correct term for this in biology is called a cladogram. And at some point next week I will teach you how to build one and how to read one. But what it does is it shows where evolution occurs, or at least spots of where evolution occurs, and it shows diversity and how things can potentially be either closely related or abstractly related to something else. So down at the bottom is always where we'll put the common ancestor. I'm trying to write pretty for you. And then all of these lines just show how we've diverged from that common ancestor. So right away you can see that there are 2 different directions we can go. We can go this way, and we can go that way. The closer you are to the common ancestor, the more primitive you tend to be. So primitive would be down here. The further away you are from that common ancestor, the more derived you tend to be. So derived would be up there. So if we look at this first branch, so straight off of the common ancestor branch, there were 2 paths we could take. We could go this way, which resulted in the formation of lemurs, or we could go this way, which resulted in the formation of lorises. There are not a whole lot of differences between these 2 species. Just by the picture you can tell there are a few key ones, like for example the lemur has a tail, the lorises doesn't, thinner limbs, longer body, but for the most part we're looking at the same organism. Now if you chose not to go this route, which would make you fairly primitive, then you went this way. Sorry, I thought I was using my laser there for a second. Then you went this way, which would make you more derived. The most derived of the species being up here with our big silverback gorilla, which also includes humans and other apes. So most derived, most specialized, most modern, if you want to think of it that way, least derived, least specialized, most primitive. Okay, so I have 2 quotes that I'd like to share with you because they're my favorite, all about evolution. The first one says, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." If you think about it, if we start way down with like our DNA structure, okay, and our DNA leads to our cells, there's my DNA or whatever in the middle, my cell leads to an entire person, and my person is going to change depending on his environment. It makes sense. Nothing is going to change here unless we have changes here. And all of it is a result of us trying to be more fit or more well adapted to the environment and the situations in which we find ourselves. Okay, the other quote is, evolution is so overwhelmingly established that it has become irrational to call it a theory. There are a lot of people who still don't believe, understand, want to believe the concept of evolution. Again, not trying to mess with anyone's belief system, but if you look at the evidence, I'd like to think that it supports the theory quite well. Alright, so we're done with evidence for evolution for right now. The sub has another set of PowerPoints that needs to be handed out. The title on that one is Evolution of Population. So if someone will help out and hand out those handouts real quick, and Joshua or OP or whoever is running the videos, if you would go ahead and switch to the next video, we're going to start our lecture over evolution of populations. Bye, guys.